Welcome back! Before moving on to the nitty-gritty of the next step, I'd like us to do a bit of a recap. In the first step, we learned all about the importance of simplifying. All questions in the SAT need to be simplified to the greatest extent possible. After simplifying questions, you'll be more focused, better equipped to understand what information you need to find in the passage, and less prone to believe that there is any ambiguity in a question. So where do we go from here? Well, you have this beautifully simplified question, and now hopefully you know exactly what information you need to find in the passage. What do we do now? I'd like to turn that question around and ask you that. What do you typically do after reading the question? Think carefully. What do you usually do after reading a question? Do you perhaps read through the answer choices in order to get a bit of a nudge or hint as to what the correct answer is? If this is what you typically do, let me stop you right there. That is a terrible approach to solving when it comes to the SAT. You should delay looking at the answer choices until such time as you have a good idea of the kind of answer choice you're looking for. So this then is the next step in the solving process. It's making what I call a rough answer. What is a rough answer? It's nothing fancy. Just imagine that there are no answer choices under the questions. If that was the case, what would you write in a short sentence or two? In that blank space. That's a rough answer. So what you are in effect doing is predicting what kind of answer you hope to see in the answer choices before you actually look at the answer choices. Why do we do this? Why not just immediately peek at the answer choices after reading the questions? Well, the answer is that the College Board spends millions of dollars developing the SAT, and they know exactly how to design incorrect distractor answer choices. These are answer choices that, at first glance, look very attractive, but in reality don't line up with what is in the passage. So the best way to avoid being drawn in by these wrong answers is by not looking at them until you're ready to do so. Okay, so there's a few rules I need you to follow when you're creating your rough answers, and I really want you to bear these in mind. Rule 1. A rough answer must be purely based on what is contained in the passage. Rule 2. A rough answer must be objectively created. And rule number 3, a rough answer must minimize interpretation and be as literal as possible. All three of these points are related, so let me briefly address them. Firstly, never include any information from outside of the passage in your rough answer. So for example, if a passage is about slavery in the South, don't try to recall information you learned in your US history class and use it for the rough answer. Only use information that exists in black and white in the passage, nothing more. Secondly, always try to be objective. Try not be influenced by any personal feelings or opinions you have on what you've just read. Your feelings, hunches, intuitions about what the passage is about must be strenuously ignored. Remember, always look at what the passage actually says, not what you feel it says. Finally, be as literal as possible in your reading of the passage and your subsequent rough answer creation. The more literal you are, and the further away you move from quote-unquote interpreting what is said, the better you'll do. Now, enough with the theory. Let's see this creating a rough answer in action. To do this, we're going to return to passage 1 of College Board Release Test number 1. So please pause the video at this point and open the same file we used during the simplification process. Okay, so here I'm going to walk you through the process of making a rough answer for questions 1, 3, 4, and 5. These questions will give you a nice cross-section of various question types in the SAT. Before moving forward though, I'd like you to pause the video here and actually read through passage 1. So I'll just wait here and you read through that first passage. Okay, now recall our simplified questions for each of those questions. For question 1, what happens in the passage? For question 3, what does directly mean? For question 4, what reaction does Akira fear from chair? We don't have a simplified question for question 5 since it's just an evidence question for question 4. So, starting off with question 1, what happens in the passage? My rough answer would be something like, a guy comes to ask a mother whether he can marry her daughter. His marriage proposal is both a surprise to the mother and done in an unusual way. This is what I would like to write in the blank gap if it was a free response question. Please note that this isn't a perfect answer. I've obviously omitted a lot of details, but it does the job. It broadly addresses what information the simplified question is looking for. More importantly though, if you asked me to provide evidence from the passage to support any part of that rough answer, I would be able to point to sections of the passage for support. This means my rough answer is A, fully supported by the passage, B, objective, and C, as close to what was literally stated in the passage as possible. Now let's move on to a more challenging question, which is question 3. Here we are being asked to figure out just what directly means. Let's return to the first paragraph. The first thing I notice is that when Akira came directly, he was breaking all traditions. The fact that breaking all traditions is modifying the word directly is a giant clue. So directly is related to the way in which he broke tradition. Let's keep reading. Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between? Would she have been more receptive? So a literal reading reveals that he had broken tradition, i.e. form, by not using a go-between. A go-between is like an intermediary or a middleman. But he had instead spoken to Chi himself. This means, directly, is something like face-to-face. So that's our rough answer. Directly means something related to face-to-face or without any sort of blockage in between him and chair. Let's now also look at line 65 and see whether I'm correct in this assessment. It says here, I asked directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. Here Akira is saying that he came directly because he didn't feel he had time to use a quote-unquote go-between. There's that word again. This confirms that directly must be related to him speaking to Chair face-to-face rather than indirectly through an intermediary or middleman. So again, my rough answer would be face-to-face. Nice, we have a literal objective rough answer that was formed purely by examining the text. Let's now turn to question 4 and 5. So these are what we call evidence questions. We follow a similar process, except now we know exactly where to look in the text. Let me remind you of the simplified question from question 4. What reaction does Akira fear from chair? Let's now move to examining the pieces of the text and seeing which could possibly answer the question of what Akira fears from chair. So first up, in answer choice A, we have line 33, and it says, his voice was soft, refined. No way. No way could this ever tell us anything about what a Kira is worried about. Next up is line 49 to 51. You know how children speak so earnestly, so hurriedly, so endearingly about things that have no importance in an adult's mind? I think we need to have a bit more context to figure out who is thinking this. So if you look back, it is clearly Chia who's thinking this. We cannot figure out what a Kira fears based on what Chia thinks, so this won't help us, so that's gone. Next up is line 63 to 64, answer choice C. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. Again, let's establish who is saying this. This is Akira saying this. So this looks really good. He fears she will judge him based on the unseemly means inappropriate, way he has made his proposal, his marriage proposal. This looks really good. We'll keep that one. But our job is not over. Let's make sure there's nothing in the final answer choice we can use. Here we're looking at lines 71 to 72, and it says, eager to make his point, he'd been looking her full in the face. Again, nothing here will tell us what reaction he fears from Chia. It's just, describing what he's actually doing in terms of looking at her. So based on answer choice C, my rough answer would be something like, his main fear is that Chia will reject him based on how he made his proposal, the way he did it, which was very unseemly in his words, inappropriate. So based on these questions, I hope you're starting to get a sense for how to make a rough answer. Now I'd like you to go ahead and make rough answers for the questions in passage 1 that I've not worked through. These would be questions 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Remember, when you're doing this, only use the passage as a guide, try be as objective as possible, and always be literal. Don't read between the lines. Pause the video here and go for it. Welcome back. Here are my rough answers for those questions in yellow. It doesn't matter if your rough answer is worded a bit differently, as long as you're able to get to a similar destination, if I can put it that way. Once again, for each of these rough answers, I'll always be able to fully support them by pointing to specific details in the text, if I need to. Make sure you're able to do the same thing. I'll be going into more detail on each of these questions in subsequent videos. So if you feel a bit lost on any of these rough answers, don't worry. Finally, a question that many students ask is, are there any exceptions to making a rough answer? Are there cases where we should look at the answer choices immediately after reading the question? The answer to that is honestly very few. The only time you should skip this step in the solving process is if the question itself is actually contained in the answer choices. Off the top of my head, an example of this could be when the question states something like, the author in this passage would agree with, and then you have the answer choices straight after that. Here you would need to look at the answer choices because there could be many things the author possibly agrees with. Let me show you an example from the current test. So you can see here in question 26, there are many implications to this statement. And it's pretty much impossible for you to telepathically consider which one the College Board wants you to highlight. So in this case, you should look at the answer choices. Remember though, these questions are rare, and your default position should always be to try and create a rough answer. So to sum up, once you have your simplified question, try and avoid looking at the answer choices until you have an idea of the kind of answer choice you're looking for. How should you move forward from here? Well, before moving on to the next video, I suggest you practice making rough answers with the 3 tests I've attached to the sidebar. In all 3 tests, I've removed the answer choices, which gives you a nice bit of space to write your rough answers. Since you've already simplified the questions, you'll have a clear guideline on what to focus on for your rough answers. So read each passage and then go and write down your rough answers in the space provided. As you work through the test, try and increase the speed at which you make your rough answers. After you've finished creating rough answers for those 3 tests, you should be totally ready to move on to the next step in the SAT solving method. So, I'll see you in the next video.